So after the out-of-body experience, I got the Yellow Pages, which is the telephone book, basically, again, pre-internet. And I looked up the name and looked up the area, the West 11, and I found that there was a person with that name living at that address in Notting Hill. So this was the first real verification for me that there was something real going on.
Welcome to What the Fuck Just Happened. I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listen to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I will be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened? Hey everyone, I have a guest today, Graham Nicholls. He is an expert on having out-of-body experiences. He teaches everyone how to do it. He taught a class on this topic at the Rhine Education Center, which I took, and it was really informative, great experience. His website is Graham Nicholls, Nicholls. I'll link to it in the website. He is also an author, and his two books are Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience and Avenues of the Human Spirit. His book, Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, is about to come out for a re-release. So it should be a really interesting conversation today. So, Graham, first of all, how do you describe what is an out-of-body experience?
Well, that's not as simple a question as it might sound, I think, because there are many different interpretations, but also there are many different ways that people experience going out of body. So I tend to divide it into two categories. There's the experiential side, how it feels to you as an individual as you're having the experience, and then the more sort of theoretical, scientific side, what might actually be going on. So that those are the two sort of ways that I look at it. So in terms of how it feels, it's more like essentially feels like you are physically floating up above the ground and basically being able to move around and act almost like a living ghost, essentially. A bit is a good way of saying it. But the difference being that you can perceive yourself, you can see yourself laying on the bed sometimes, you can travel over distances to different locations, you can see things that are going on, you can even potentially go into other levels of reality, maybe. I don't know what exactly they are. Nobody really does, but there are different levels that people experience in the out-of-body experience. And then there are the theories and ideas about what might actually be going on. Some theories put forward the idea that you're probably still within your body, but a part of you is extended out, almost like a computer connecting to the internet. And then other theories put forward the idea that there's some kind of energetic form or energetic version of yourself, and that is coming out or separating from the physical form and is going to another location. So I tend to subscribe more to the idea that it's some kind of interconnected consciousness, extended consciousness, rather than a body, because, well, the body is not as common as people often believe it is. Many people don't experience it. And also, when people do experience some kind of energy body, it doesn't necessarily appear as if it's physical in the sense that it has some kind of actual, how can I put this? That it has some kind of actual objective reality independent of the person's actual inner experience. So that's kind of how I would define it. I think that we're dealing with some kind of extension of psychic ability. It's like all of your psychic abilities all activated all at once. And that gives you this multi-sensory experience that is an out of body experience.
How close, I know on this show we've talked some about near-death experiences. How similar do you think an out-of-body experience is to a near-death experience? Or how similar can it be? Can you mimic what it's like when you pass away?
Well, an out of body experience is a part of a near death experience. A near death experience often includes the coming out of the body and the traveling around and that kind of thing. So most near death experiences include that out of body component. But I would say they do seem to have certain distinctions, like traveling down a tunnel is the common description with near death experiences. Um, the experience of being in another level of reality that seems to be an afterlife type environment. That seems to be less frequent in out of body experiences, that take place from normal physical health. That tends to be something that doesn't happen, but it does sometimes happen. So it's just less frequent. So I think really they're very similar. There's a lot of crossover elements, like the drifting out of the body, like floating, moving over distances, perceiving what's going on physically. All of those elements that we would call an out of body experience are usually present in a near death experience. But some people in near death experiences have more of a internal experience where they're in kind of unknown environment, sometimes a dark environment, sometimes a light environment. It's not doesn't mean it's negative because it's dark. It's just that it sometimes doesn't have any physical or visual elements to it.
First of all, what got you interested in studying out of body experiences? That's a pretty unique thing to spend your life dedicated to.
Well, I'd always had unusual experiences since the age of around 5. I saw an apparition when I was in the building that I grew up in. I left my bedroom and saw this apparition standing in the doorway, which at the time was quite scary, and I didn't really know what to make of it. And from that point onwards, I had lots of unusual experiences, some of which when I got to about 11 or 12, I had some out of body experiences just spontaneously. So really, I always had a leaning in that direction. I started looking into all kinds of esoteric ideas and astrology and all kinds of things, designed a symbol for myself, which I have on my ring. I still use that symbol to this day. So yeah, it was a kind of time of discovery in my early childhood where all of these things seemed to just happen quite naturally. But then I wanted to learn more about it. I think I heard on a news program something about this idea of out of body experiences. And when I heard that concept, I wanted to find out more because it seemed to be what happened to me. I didn't know for sure because obviously when I had my first out of body experiences, they weren't similar to anything I'd ever experienced before, and I didn't have a terminology or a vocabulary to describe it or to talk about it. It was something that was completely alien until I started to hear these kinds of concepts talked about in the media and things like that. So then I went out and got a book on the subject, and I started to learn about it, and I basically devoted myself to learn to induce some experiences intentionally. So that was really the that was really the turning point. I devoted myself for about a year. I said that I was going to spend all my time trying to do this. I was really, I don't know why, I don't know where that came from, that sort of passion to do it and to learn more about it. But it was just, it seemed like the most fascinating thing out there to me at the time. So I read everything I could. I practiced every single night. I looked into all kinds of different pagan traditions and things like this, and learned from different people in all different fields. And eventually, after 6 months of consistent practice every single night, I had my first induced out of body experience. And then that was really that was the no turning back. Then that was sort of like the floodgates opened, and I really became quite obsessed with the topic from then on.
I don't blame you. I'm fairly obsessed, and I don't really have abilities, so I have not really had out of body experiences, and I'm so jealous and try so hard. So I remember you had mentioned, definitely I remember one about a church, and I believe a few other experiences that were just fascinating, and they were verified, which made, helped demonstrate this isn't just in your head. Would you mind sharing maybe one or two of the most veridical, which everyone listening, that means when they've been verified as evidential in some way, like a couple of the most veridical experiences you've had?
Sure. Those particular kinds of experiences really fascinated me because obviously they suggest that this isn't just some kind of dream or delusion or things like that. So right at the beginning, I wasn't sure what I would say it was. I was having these amazing experiences and they seemed hyper real, but I wasn't really sure that it wasn't some kind of hallucination or anything like that. And then, so the first veridical experience I had started with me finding myself, I induced the experience, but instead of finding myself just in my bedroom, often I find myself at locations quite far away from there. Even my first out of body experiences were probably half a mile from where I was physically. I would find myself that distance. So I found myself in this particular instance at the end of Edgware Road just on the corner of Bayswater Road in London, where Marble Arch is. If people don't know London, there's a big sort of structure called Marble Arch right there, and it's near to Hyde Park. It's right in the sort of centre of London, and I found myself there around the height of the lampposts, so kind of literally sort of hanging in the air, and I was drifting along Bayswater Road, drifted all the way down and then moved off towards Notting Hill and Portobello Road. And then I found myself in front of a street with lines of houses. And I remember seeing the postcode sign in London. There's the kind of metal signs that they have everywhere with the postcode, and this one said W11. So I remember seeing that. I just zoomed in on that, so I didn't see the whole sign. I just zoomed in on the West 11, and then I drifted forward and I went into the upper floor of the house, and I saw some papers and like an office table set up basically. So this was in the sort of mid 90s, so kind of pre-internet and all of that kind of stuff. So it was, the person still had letterhead paper with their sort of name and address on it. And I remember that I could perceive the name of the person on the paper. I couldn't perceive all the information. I was trying to perceive certain things, but I managed to perceive the name. So I knew that it was West 11. I knew that the name of the person, and I knew roughly where the street was because of where it was in relation to Bayswater Road. So after the out of body experience, I got the yellow pages, which is the telephone book, basically, again, pre internet. And I looked up the name and looked up the area, the West 11. And I found that there was a person with that name living at that address in Notting Hill. So this was the first real verification for me that there was something real going on. Then at the end of the 90s, I had probably my most powerful veridical out of body experience, which was the Soho bombing. There was it was also precognitive, and it was a very unique experience. I don't know of any other like it, because there were 4 other people in the room with me when the experience happened. So I was teaching some of my techniques, specifically the G technique, which is one of the methods I use for inducing out of body experiences. And I found myself feeling overwhelmed, like there was a sort of energy overcoming me. And I went down onto the ground to get some sort of stability, and almost instantly went into an out of body experience. Started off going through a natural environment, almost through sort of tangled roots and plants and stuff like that. And then it seemed to break away, and I found myself standing in Old Compton Street, which is Soho in the centre of London. And I looked ahead, and there was a bar up to the right, and I saw an explosion burst out. I looked to my right, and I saw the Polo Bar, which is on Old Compton Street. So I was able to know exactly where I was, and that there was this explosion. Everything was in this bluish grey tinge to my vision. And then I felt this emotional wave hit me in the chest, as if it came from the actual place. And I came out of the experience, went into a semi-trance state, and one of the people who was there could tell there was something intense going on with me. So he helped sort of coax me out, kind of try and bring me out of that state that I was in. And then I described to everyone that I'd seen this bombing, and that I felt that it was precognitive. I had this strong feeling that this was something that was going to happen. I'd never had a precognitive experience before, but I had this strong sort of knowing that this was something that was going to happen. And then 5 days after that, there was a bombing in the bar on Old Compton Street, how I'd seen it in the out of body experience. So it was a very powerful experience and very unique because of the people who were there who sort of witnessed it. I made a video about 10 years ago, actually, now, where I described what happened, and also one of the witnesses who was there is also in the video describing his version of what he remembers of, what I said, etc., to sort of back up and verify what I said. And then more recently, I've had experiences like the one you mentioned, the church. That was the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral in Tallinn in Estonia. I lived in Estonia for 10 years. So a lot of my experiences during that period were in that city. And I saw some details about the building, that there was damage to one of the outer windows, etc. And again, was able to go and sort of verify that the details as I'd seen them were correct. And I also had another one during that time when they were hoisting the Christmas tree into place for the Christmas market. I had an out of body experience and went over the top, and I saw them doing all of that and said what was happening. And again, we went and verified, and they were hoisting the tree at that moment while I'd had the out of body experience. So they hadn't even finished when we got there. So it was kind of literally, I'd seen it in total real time. Yeah, and other kinds of experiences like that, really. But yeah, there's been quite a few that were verified with my former partner, and then also with other people from events, and also one of a flood as well that was happening in the US. I perceived the flood and emailed Anthony Peake, who's another author on these topics, and it turned out the flood did happen as I saw it in the out of body experience as well. So yeah.
I'm the kind of person without that verification, I would think these are some really cool, vivid dreams, but I wouldn't believe there was any non-local consciousness. And I've been, as people listening know, my dad passed away, so I've been really into studying if there's a possibility of non-local consciousness, and stories like that I think can give all of us who are worried about that a lot of very tangible, beyond hope, something tangible to grasp onto.
And then people the skeptics will then instantly say, oh, but it's just anecdotes and it's, it's not in the laboratory. So I did the laboratory research as well. So
Oh, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the lab because I'm a sciencey person. So that was, I'd love to read all the studies. Let's hear it.
I've worked with Rupert Sheldrake, was the first person I got in touch with. That was probably about 2007. I started doing some work with him. We did a range of controlled experiments, mainly looking at telepathy, but I also did some with precognition, and I got the highest score he'd ever seen in a precognition test. So that was a computer controlled, completely blind experiment. So
would you mind describing the details of the experiment? I'm also going to say to everybody, if you heard Graham Nicholls say that he got off the charts abilities, that's, I think, a thing we all get confused about because most people can't do this. Then we think it's not true because we'll try, or there'll be an experiment in a class and you say, oh, see, it's not true. But it's the white crow theory. If a few people can do it, that means it's true.
well, I think overall most people do have some ability, for sure. I mean, when you look at most of the science that's been done on Psi has been done with like just ordinary undergraduate students, and they still get statistically significant results. If you control for creative types, musicians, and people like that, then they start to get off the chart sort of results. So it seems to be creative people, especially musicians. I'm not a musician, by the way. People look at the hair, they think I'm a musician. I've got no musical ability, so just put that out there. But yeah, so that particular experiment worked with sound. Although I think I am a bit more visual, so I used visuals to help me. So what it was there was a selection of sounds, different. For example, one was the sounds of cars, I think, and then another one was a Beatles song, and then another one was birds singing. So just sort of random sounds, basically. And you had to pick which of this selection of sounds you believed was going to be played next. So basically, it was computer run, so it could have been anything. It was completely random, and it could also be the same sound twice in a row, or three times in a row, even, or whatever. So you had to sort of be open to that as well. So yeah, what I did, I used two sort of techniques with it. I did associate a visual with it because I felt that would be easier for me. So the birds, I imagined a bird singing. The cars, I imagined sort of people getting out of cars. Beatles, I sort of imagined like someone playing a guitar. So I kind of created visuals to associate with all of them. And then the method that I used that seemed to be really helpful with that was that I tried to send the information backwards in time. So I had this idea that, well, it's precognition. So generally with the things that I've had precognitive experiences about and things that people describe as having precognitions about tend to be emotional things, like intense things, like a terrorist attack or like some kind of big event, 9/11 or whatever. So I figured that if I make it big, if I just sort of see the result and I go, oh, okay, I was right, okay, I was wrong, then there's not much of an impact there. So what I thought was, okay, I'm gonna try and make it really emotionally significant, like when I get the result, and I tried to really really drum it home into my own mind, and I thought that way it'll be easier for me to pick it up, if you like. And it did seem to help because, like I say, it came out as the best result he'd seen in one of those tests. So yeah, that was a technique that I used. But yeah, so I just literally had to select which audio track I believed was going to be playing next. And then they did several, I forget how many, but there was a whole load of them. And then it was assessed statistically. So say, for argument's sake, if it was, they would expect by chance that you would get maybe like I don't know, 2 out of 10 or something like that. So anything above that would be above chance. So if you got 5 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, then it's getting really significant, basically. So that's basically how most parapsychology is done. They end up with these huge numbers of statistics of how many trials, and then overall you get kind of an average. And like I say, if you control for certain types of people or certain individuals, then the rates can go really, really high and be way beyond what you would expect by chance. Then I did some experiments. I did some with the Rhine. That was probably the biggest I've ever done, which was, I believe it was 14 weeks. I think there was 12 weeks of the actual experiment and 14 weeks in total. The Rhine selected a target in the US. I was in Estonia at the time, and I was just sent an email saying there is a target, and I had to try and perceive it psychically. So I could use any
And to clarify, a target's a specific location, right?
Well, in that case, it was an image. In those particular case, randomized images. They were things like path in the countryside, some mountains, or a fire engine, or a cupcake. You know, it could be like anything. They literally used this pool of images that are popular for psychology experiments because they've been selected to be a real cross range of random images. So yeah, in that particular experiment, they were images, and I tried to receive them. And again, it was looked at statistically, and we got overall a statistically significant result. Again, like, so meaning above chance, what we would expect by someone guessing. Then I also did an experiment with.
Wait, may I ask you one question quickly about the Rhine? How did you get that information? Did you go out of body and physically look at the item?
Because it was 14 weeks, I tried a few different methods to see what would. So I used Ganzfeld for a couple. I think I divided it up, and I used some Ganzfeld, some remote viewing, and some out of body. And the out of body ones, when it worked, the out of body ones were the most accurate and successful. So that was interesting.
Would you mind just quickly explaining how you incorporate the Ganzfeld? Because I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is.
The Ganzfeld is a form of mild sensory deprivation, basically, or perceptual deprivation, to be very specific. It's basically, they take a ping pong ball and they cut it in half and they put it over your eyes, and then they shine a red light, which causes the pupils to dilate and for the brain to look for information. But as there isn't anything, you've just got this uniform red glow because of the ping pong balls. You then basically start to have very mild hallucinations, and images and concepts and things start to come into your mind. So it's a way of getting to that sort of state. Usually they also use pink noise is the milder version, or white noise is the one most people know about. I, in my experiments, wasn't using sound so much. I was using the visual aspect and just sound cancelling headphones mainly. And I also used my infraliminal technology, which is sound technology that I developed to help me get into a sort of trance state. So my aim was less for the literal sort of how it's used in telepathy experiments, where you just sort of randomly things just bubble up and you describe them. I was using it more with a specific focus on those images, those targets. So I find that sensory deprivation just deepens whatever it is you're trying to do. It's a way of getting you into a different state of consciousness. So it makes it more likely that you'll have an out-of-body experience, or more likely that your psychic information will be accurate, or more likely that you'll go into a trance state. So it's just a way of aiding yourself and helping yourself to get into a different state of mind. So Ganzfeld can be quite helpful. But it could be you could use a flotation tank, for example, as well. But I just didn't. I used what I had available to me. So that's basically the Gansfeld.
And the out of body was the one that worked best for you.
In that particular study, yeah.
And then you were starting to mention another study before I interrupted you about the Gansfeld.
Yeah, so the final one was really intriguing because that was at the Institute of Noetic Sciences with Dean Radin. And I did a talk there about my work. And afterwards, we went to his lab, and he has a kind of steel Faraday cage. Basically, it's a big steel box. Looks a bit like a bank vault or a cell or something. And they put you inside that, and they kind of lock you in. And then in this particular experiment, I was trying to have an impact on an interferometer, which is basically for doing the famous double slit experiment in quantum mechanics. So this interferometer, which is basically a sort of device that fires photons. So it's firing photons, and you have a recording, you're listening to an audio recording, and the audio recording tells you to focus on changing the photons. So basically impacting them, collapsing the function, the wave function, or whatever it is they're instructing you to do in that particular moment. And then they also tell you to not do anything. So they have like a control. So they have a period when you're not doing anything, and then they have a comparison when you are doing something. And there was also a light in your visual field. When the light became bright, it basically meant that you were being successful. So you would stare at the light and try to make the light brighter, basically. And I had a really intense experience in there. I started having really intense vibrations, like the vibrational state, which is common prior to an out-of-body experience. So I started to have that. So I was almost like having to hold myself back from having an out-of-body experience. I think it was just the strange scenario of being in this unusual environment, maybe. But I was holding myself back, and then it was almost like I was generating heat. So the whole room started to become like a sauna, and it became really, really intensely hot. And when we opened the door, they described that that literally there was like a wall of heat came out when I came out of the Faraday room. And again, the results were in the predicted direction, so i.e. supportive of there being a psychic effect on the photons.
It blows my mind because it just defies how we understand how the world works. And you mentioned before this that you also had a few out-of-body experiences that included another person.
There were instances when I was at school, we did some experiments where that was the first time where we seemed like we were able to meet while we were out of body. It's quite hard to do that particular thing, so I haven't had many instances of that. But I've also been seen in recent years while out of body as a kind of shadow figure. So that's something that seems to be quite common, that's how people describe seeing someone out of body is they see them as a kind of shadow. So when I was living in Estonia, when I first went there, I was living in a kind of almost like a spiritual community place. There's quite a few of those kind of places around Estonia. And when I came back to the UK, I had an out-of-body experience and went back to Tallinn. And when I returned there physically, people said that they'd seen my presence as a kind of shadow while I was away.
So now we've talked a lot about the evidential. And
yeah.
Unless there's another vertical one you want to share, you also mentioned you can experience other dimensions. I want to hear about some of the weirdest experiences you've had going out of body.
Well, actually, there's even an evidential experience related to other levels of reality, because I had an experience where there'd basically been a plane crash, and I was in this otherworldly environment. It was all misty, cloudy, very stereotypical in many ways of what people describe as a sort of afterlife type environment. But that's how it looked. It had this cloudy, no up, no down kind of feeling about it. And I looked into the distance and I saw about 150 meters away, which also seems to be a consistent distance, because even in the Soho precognitive experience, for example, it was at that kind of distance. So I was looking at all these people. I saw elements of their lives. I got a sense of where they were from. I got a sense that they'd all passed very quickly. And then when I came out of the experience, I found that there'd been a plane crash that had happened at the same time that I'd had the experience, and that about 150 people had been killed. I think it was 144, something like that. And I'd written in my diary literally about 150 people. I'd written that they were probably Russian or something like that. And the people that had died in the crash were basically from that area. So yeah, so that was like an evidential experience of another level of reality. But yeah, the other levels, I talk about them less because it's very tricky, because obviously you can't know for sure if it's a real environment. And even when we say real, it's interesting because I think that probably some of these environments, like what's traditionally called the Summerlands, for example, some of those environments are quite possibly almost like a consensus between different minds. It's almost like lots of people experiencing something and it kind of builds up. It's almost like a group mind, possibly. So I tend to wonder if that's what's going on with those kinds of environments. So the classic ones, yeah, would be the sort of Summerland type environments, which are just infused with sunlight, very beautiful, very like natural environments, mountains, valleys, very, very lush environments. Those seem to be very consistent across cultures, and I've experienced them since I was in my teens, those kinds of environments. I've also experienced more energetic appearing environments where other beings appear as just sort of energy forms, even shapes, geometric forms, things like that. Again, like I say, it starts to get very difficult to really to know, but interestingly, some of the geometric forms like orbs and other sort of forms, shapes, and things that are commonly seen in those kinds of experiences are sometimes seen physically as well. I had another experience when I was about 16 with a musician friend of mine. So we both saw it, and we saw this orb, this large green orb, float into the middle of the room. So the interesting thing is this orb idea, this concept of seeing things as orbs seems to be something that many people have talked about. And I think there's evidence from within the out of body experiences and within what people experience and what people see. So another example would be that it's around, I think something in the region of around 30%. I forget the statistic exactly, but somewhere in the region around 30% people who have an out of body experience will see an orb. They will see themselves as an orb. They will experience themselves as an orb. It's almost as common as people perceiving an energy body. So yeah, so there's this interesting area of where energies and forms seem to correlate with what people experience when they're in other levels of reality and what I've perceived in other levels. So I've also had experiences of a kind of interconnected mind. There's a famous painting by Alex Gray called The Universal Mind Lattice. And I had an experience that looked almost identical to that, which was like a huge fountain of energy. And when I went into it, it was like I was experiencing the minds of millions of people all at once. I could only maintain it for a few seconds. It was enough to
Have you ever had your brain scanned during these experiences or any physiological galvanic skin response or anything?
I've done off of my own back, basically. I've done work with neurofeedback. Basically, that's EEG. So I've done EEG, not necessarily fully out of body, but I've done quite a bit where I've been in the vibrational state. That was actually how I developed the infraliminal sound, because I literally observed what was going on with my brain when I was having the vibrational state. And then I tried to use sound frequencies and different sound patterns to try and recreate the vibrational state. So mainly that. I haven't found it that easy to go into an out of body experience necessarily when rigged up to things. Unfortunately, it can be quite distracting. But I would love to try that for sure. That would be very interesting. There was a study in Canada, the only one I'm aware of, where they scanned a girl in an fMRI scanner and observed what was going on in her brain.
What did they discover?
They basically discovered that a whole range of different areas of her brain were active. It was essentially as if she was interacting with the world physically, but she wasn't. So her brain was experiencing the world as if she was out there doing things, but she wasn't. It didn't back up the more skeptical science that has claimed that the temporoparietal junction or the angular gyrus are the causes of out of body experiences. It just showed that the brain was interacting in a way as if someone was physically moving around, but they weren't. So that was interesting to me, and it was also mostly left sided as well. Whereas in a lot of the Olaf Blanquet research, for example, which is the more sort of skeptical research, it was focused more on the right. So we have in the science, the brain science seems to point to all kinds of different types of activity. So there is no one specific area or specific type of activity at this point that we can pinpoint and say that is definitely what's responsible for out of body experiences. I literally just last week published a little video called "What is an out of body experience?" and I mentioned that study in there, and I put the study on screen. So
Oh, perfect. I'll link to that as well then. What does it feel like when you're out of body? Does it feel the same as in body? Like everything feels tangible. You can eat like a sandwich and experience it. You can like hug your dog.
not for me personally. For me, it's more like being, having no physical form. Like, if I try and touch something, my hand will just pass through it. So no, I don't. I mean, if you're on a different level, then sometimes you can interact or have some kind of tangible interaction with things. I've tried to affect things physically. That was always something that's been interesting to me. The idea of whether you could move an object or something like that. I've not really had any luck with that or success with that. The only instance that I can think of like that was there was a poster on my wall, and I literally passed through it in the out of body experience. Was trying to touch the wall or to interact with the wall, and I passed through it in the out of body experience. It wasn't aware of causing any damage or affecting it in any way. But afterwards, when I came out of the out of body experience, there was a mark on an indent, like a line on the poster. And I don't know to this day, was it there already? Was it done physically already and I just didn't notice? Or was it caused by what I was doing with the out of body experience? I really don't know. But that's the only instance where it seemed like it could have been caused by the out of body experience.
And when you think about it, I mean, physics says none of us are solid. You know, we experience ourselves and material as solid, but tons of space of little vibrating particles that are separate. So there's got to be, I would guess, somehow that ties into out of bodies and our ability to move through objects, supposedly when we're out of body. I mean, I don't think anyone knows enough to explain how yet, but there's something to that we're absolutely not solid.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that we're experiencing some kind of sort of simulation when we're in an out of body experience as well. I'm quite open to the idea that it's a sort of that it is a kind of construct, but it's a construct based on real information, real data, if you like. So you're kind of experiencing almost like a live virtual reality stream or something of that nature. Something like that might be what's going on as well. There's so many possibilities of what could be going on. That's why it's a really interesting area, because there isn't really much science being done on the subject. Unfortunately, it's a very overlooked topic.
I know there isn't necessarily science at all for this, but we talked about the consensus reality and what you just talked about, maybe that's part of when you're out of body. To what extent do you think maybe while we're here, that is just a consensus reality and a bit of a virtual reality?
I don't subscribe to it's all just here, we're all just here for a lesson or something like that. I don't subscribe to that. I tend to think that physical reality is just as meaningful as any other form of reality. It might even be the pinnacle. I know people tend to put the non-physical as more important or somehow like better or in a hierarchy, and I don't tend to see things in a hierarchy. I tend to just see it as different. The non-physical reality is just different to the physical reality, the different expressions of reality, of life. I'm just interested in all of them, in all the different ways that reality works, and that consciousness works. Like the same way, I don't think, for example, I don't know, when I'm in a trance, that it's necessarily a more important or better form of consciousness than when I'm reading a book or, in a different state. It's just different. All of those different states of mind and like an out of body experience or whatever, they're all valuable additions to the richness of our lives, but they're not necessarily one's more important than another. That's, I guess, how I see it. But whether this could be some kind of virtual reality, I mean, for sure, there's evidence in that direction. There's quite a lot of scientists now who are saying it's quite statistically sort of feasible that we are living in some kind of virtual reality or simulation. I guess though, if the simulation is all you've ever known, it's then it is reality, really.
I tend to agree with you on what you just said about like the different states of reality. And I mean, I think we also just can't know. But I tend to agree to not think non physical is better and just, I mean, how do we know? And we're here. Let's just experience.
I also think that there are some almost toxic ideas that sort of stem out from that, like the denial of our physical body, of our natural sort of desires and who we are as human beings and all of those kinds of things, which I think are quite sort of problematic ideas that can come out from that. I've also heard people say we don't have to worry about the environment, for example, because it's all just, we're only here to learn anyway. It doesn't matter. If you take that sort of further than that, then it's sort of, well, you wouldn't think anything really matters, because if it's all just a meaningless simulation, then I've heard people say, oh, we shouldn't care about people starving in another country, for example, because, oh, that's their lesson. They incarnated in that place to learn. And for me, that's such a toxic idea. That kind of thinking is not healthy. So yeah, I that's why I try to see the physical as we should celebrate it. We're really lucky to be here and to have this life, and I really believe in living in a healthful way, and healthful and helpful. To try to sort of live the best life we can physically and spiritually.
I agree with you 100%. I think evidence points to the fact that there's non local consciousness as well, and that we do survive death, something I never thought was possible before studying this. But even if that's true, like we're here, why not be here? Just like, you don't go on a trip and just spend your whole time thinking about going home, ideally. So I figure if there are all these other dimensions, be in the dimension you're in.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think this would be something that'd be very, very important emotionally to people. I don't know if you've ever had experience with this, but is it possible to visit your deceased loved ones during out of bodies? Has anyone had experiences with that?
It definitely is, but it's definitely not the easiest thing to do, and it often, in terms of what people describe, and even my own experience, I lost my father a few years ago, and I also had some sort of experiences related to that too. So I think there is the potential to do it. It often doesn't always materialize in the way that you expect it to. It sometimes goes along completely unexpected routes. So I think that's the key thing to remember with that kind of thing. It's, I don't know, those kinds of levels and those kinds of experiences, they seem to operate in a very different way, even in terms of time. Like the way time and space and everything operates. But people I've worked with over the years have definitely focused on that and had different degrees of success with that kind of thing. So it's not easy, but I think if there is that connection and that desire and working with those things, I think it can unfold for sure. One example was for me, a close family friend who was pretty much like my auntie. She looked after me a lot when I was a kid. She taught me to cook my first vegetarian food, things like that. When she died, I had an experience where I found myself in Cuba. At the time, I didn't really connect why I'd been drawn to Cuba. And then afterwards, I opened my diary, and the last entry in my diary was the entry about her dying. And I went to enter the entry about Cuba, and then I realized that she was born in Cuba. So it felt like a message from her. It felt like I was kind of being drawn there because of her, but I didn't realize it kind of at the time. So that's an example of how maybe I would have been thinking, oh, I would see her in an out of body experience and have some kind of interaction. But instead, I was shown the place that she was born. I was kind of drawn there in the out of body experience. So sometimes it can be almost like a message or a way of saying, I'm good, but it won't necessarily mean that the two people will meet, if you like. But sometimes it does.
Which would be amazing. I think that's what we all want. I'm certainly trying that with my dad, and I lost my mentor and like almost like a second mom to me recently. So I definitely would love to see both of them again. But even if not, just the evidential aspects of out of body combined with all the other research shows that one day, when you compare it against eternity or trillions of years, however long non local consciousness might last, it still shows that you will see them again one day. Now, I know you teach how to have out of bodies. Can ordinary people just actually have out of bodies doing these exercises? People who really never consider themselves the type to have quote unquote weird, inexplicable abilities? Is it worth all of people like me and all of those type of people trying this?
Well, I do think I'm kind of an ordinary person.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's one of the things that's so interesting is all these people with extraordinary experiences. When we meet all you guys, no one's different than anyone else. But I guess, should people be too discouraged if they don't feel they have abilities to try it, or is it worth trying?
Well, it took me 6 months of hard work, so I don't feel like it was an easy thing necessarily. I know I had some early experiences, but I think they were more maybe what piqued my interest rather than like that I just had this strong natural ability. I definitely had to work really hard, and I was nearly at the point of giving up when I succeeded. So it had been 6 months every single night, and that's a lot of effort. So yeah, I think it is worth sort of sticking with it, and it is. I don't think that you necessarily have to be a different kind of person or anything like that. But I think what I would say is it's maybe what was different about me was the willingness to do that 6 months of effort. I would say that the main difference that I see with people is that they want shortcuts, or they want to get there the easy way or whatever. They're not willing to sort of put the effort in. That's what really separates people out. When you look at people who are incredible musicians or whatever, or dancers or athletes, do any of them do it purely on natural ability? They all work really hard to get to that point. They all study, they all practice, they all do all of that stuff in a really intense, devoted way. And I think that's really the difference. It's not that there's anything different about people's brains or anything like that necessarily. Maybe on some occasions there are people who are, like Mozart or something, who, like 8 years old and they can do. There are these sort of prodigies, but there's plenty of other people who have worked really hard and got there that way as well. So yeah, I do really think you can do it. I think with out of body experiences, it's definitely doable. I think it's just the factors are that it takes a long time. It's not something that necessarily people do right away. I don't want to say never, because some people do. I've had students who their first ever attempts, they've had an out of body experience. It does happen. It's not the norm. It's not the norm. It didn't happen for me, and it doesn't happen for most people. They're the sort of exceptions. Most people, it's around 2 months now with our modern sort of techniques and everything. Around 2 months of consistent work. So that's the thing. Most people don't make it to the 2 months of consistent work. They'll do like 2 weeks and then they'll get bored and they'll go off and do something else. So you have to really want it, I would say.
And I've noticed after taking your class, I might have had like a dream or two that got a little verified, where I went to my home apartment and I saw my mom, and I thought this alarm had gone off, or I thought our doorman had like come in the apartment in the middle of the night. It was actually frightening. And then I found out from my mom that the smoke alarm started going off at that time, and she was jolted awake. And in the dream, I felt I was in there seeing her sleep and jolted awake because I felt like someone breaking in, and it was one of our doormen who we trust completely. But in the dream, it was kind of this jolting experience. That was probably the closest to a verified out of body. So I'm interrupting myself here because I realize when I went to edit that I didn't explain this story very well. So what happened was I had a dream that I was home. By home, I mean home, my childhood home, where I don't live anymore. And I was not actually physically there that night. I was in my apartment in Brooklyn. And I walked into my mom's bedroom and the phone rang, and it rang really loudly. And I dreamt it was her old landline, my parents' old landline, not just the cell phones that my mom has now. And it was this loud ring. And for some reason, I felt a terror. Like I really jumped. And I don't know why. And one thing that was interesting was that it didn't look dreamlike. You know how things in dreams often have something that's off or something that's different than how it is in real life? Everything looked exactly how my parents' bedroom would look, with my mom sleeping in it as if I was really there at 2 in the morning. And after the phone rang, I remembered suddenly feeling this terror that the phone rang, and then that suddenly someone was entering the apartment. And in the dream, it was just our doorman. And we've had doormen my whole life. They're really kind. There's just no reason either the phone ringing or thinking that the doorman was coming in would be terrifying. So apparently what my mom ended up telling me was that night in the middle of the night, the smoke alarm went off. She woke up and was jolted and had to call the doorman to come up to fix it. So that was, in my mind, seemed like kind of evidential of an out of body. So that was it. Okay, back to my conversation with Graham. And I notice I'll feel the waves and vibrations, and I feel them a few feet above my body, which is a very cool experience. And maybe I'll get further. I'm trying. We'll see.
that's a good experience right away there, you know.
So you talked a little bit about how out of body, it doesn't feel like you don't have physical sensations. Or do you have any forms of physical sensations when you're out of body? Or is it just complete? Like, how are you getting your information? I guess is what I'm asking.
Primarily visual and auditory information. Primarily, I do have physical movement, sort of kinetic sensations sometimes. I mean, that's something I should emphasize. I think we need a lot more research as well, looking at the phenomenology of out of body experiences, because I think they can be quite different. I mentioned in my precognitive experiences, for example, that there's a sort of blue grey quality in some of those experiences, like the Soho bombing one. That's one type of visual perception that I've noted. But then I also have other duotone experiences, meaning two color experiences. So it seems that there's these visual experiences that have these, they don't have all the colors that we would associate with physical vision, for example. And then I also have experiences where I'm hearing things, and my hearing seems to be more complex. It seems like I'm hearing things. Well, I can't actually compare them to anything physical. So I don't know whether they are like what maybe like some other kind of animal would hear, or whether I'm experiencing something that's non physical in nature. But sometimes you get frequencies and sounds that are different. So there's all kinds of different sensory information. And I think that really needs to be studied as well. Like I mentioned, people often experience themselves as like an orb, like a traveling orb, or just a pure consciousness, or sometimes you feel kind of waves, almost like tides of energy moving through the space. So there's all these different kinds of sensations and sensory information that's different to what we would experience physically. And I don't know what they are and what they relate to. And I think it's very interesting that we need to sort of learn more about that. If we're going to understand what an out of body experience is, we need to learn more about and look at more related to those kinds of experiences and those kinds of visual and different kinds of sensory information that comes through.
Now, you said it's less colors than you see in this dimension.
Well, it can be more as well.
That was going to be my question. Have you ever seen a color that you don't really see in this dimension?
Definitely, there are times when vision would be sort of hyper real. So, or like seeing normally, but with extra color or more detail or deeper perception, that kind of thing. So it can go that way, but it can go either way. So it seems that the way our vision and our senses and even our physicality in an out of body experience, how they are constructed, differs in different experiences. So that suggests that something is having an impact on those structures. So is that our state of consciousness? Is that something to do with the how the psi information is coming in? Is that, is that something to do with a mental construct? I think it's probably multiple different things interacting at once, but that's definitely something that needs to be looked into a lot more, because I don't know really of anyone who's gone into that other than sort of my work, really. So that's something that really needs to be looked at, especially the visual side of things for the science. If we're going to get more of that, seeing targets and doing research in the lab, the more we can understand how vision works in out of body experience, the more we can understand how the veridical elements come through, the better the results we're going to get.
I'm actually in the middle of reading Dr. Kenneth Ring's book, Mind Sight, about blind people who were able to see and report back facts. Blind, yeah, people have been born blind. And
Sure, yeah. I'm aware of that book, yeah.
have you ever had anyone blind or deaf, or people who are able to have a type of sensory experience that when they're here they can't have, like blind people, deaf people?
I did have one student who was blind, but we didn't get very far with the teaching with him. So no, I haven't really done very much with anyone who's blind. It would be very interesting for sure to see if that could happen. No, I haven't done much with just that one person, like I say, and we didn't go very far with the teaching with him.
That would be one of my dream studies, would be to try out a body with a group of blind people and put visual, maybe even people who knew what seeing was, who became blind later in life, and compare both. That would be just so interesting. And this could also be a game changer for people who maybe are bedridden or, what is the experiential difference from your perspective of the OBEs that are more verified, more of this world, versus the ones that seem to be completely next level?
Yeah, that's a good question. They do have a quality that's different. I do usually kind of pay attention. I kind of notice when there's something. Obviously, there's the blue-grey quality that I will notice straight away, but there is also a sort of deeper level to the actual experience. It's like you're in a deeper state of trance. Especially the Soho one I was very, very deep. It took me a period of time to come out of that trance. Literally, there was a guy there called Chris and another guy called Lawrence, and they were literally having to, they knew something intense was happening to me. They were literally trying to sort of coax me back out of it. Interestingly, it was almost like they were tuning into me. There was some kind of energetic interaction going on. Chris was sort of breathing in a very specific way, and it seemed like, from what he said as well, that I was sort of responding to the way he was breathing. So it was almost like his breathing was slowly bringing me back to normal consciousness. So it was quite a slow process. So yeah, there is a depth difference, and there is a sort of vividness. It's almost like if you wear glasses and you're looking at the world without your glasses, and then you put the glasses on and suddenly everything sort of comes into sharp focus. It's sort of like that. A normal experience would be like the not wearing glasses, and the really veridical and powerful experiences would be more like you're wearing glasses. There's a kind of sharpness and a crystalline nature to it. The most common state that I've had veridical experiences in has been a state I call the crystalline state. And I named it that literally because it is like this sharp crystalline perception. It's very, very crisp and clear. The one with the church, for example, that you mentioned, that one was when I was in that crystalline state. Yeah, there's a definite quality, but it's very difficult to describe in words what I'm talking about. But there's a sort of, I guess you could say, something akin to being in the zone as well. When you're very hyper focused and everything's just flowing and there's no stress, you have no feeling of stress, just everything feels really in tune. It's kind of like that. And whenever I get all of those aspects in an experience, then I know that's a significant experience.
Is there ever a risk you can't get back in your body?
No, I don't think so. I think these are sort of like old superstitions from like a bygone age, really, that kind of stuff. Like I said, I don't even know if it's leaving the body as such. People tend to think of it almost like you're like a Russian doll or something, and you like something's popped out and gone off over there, and that's left you completely empty. And I don't think that's how it works. I think it's more that you're sending your perceptions, your sensory awareness, your point of consciousness extended beyond your body. But I don't think that means that your brain is now somehow empty, or that your body is somehow empty and something could just sort of pop in. And I also don't think that in the same sense you can get lost. That's your unique framework, your unique pattern, your unique interaction with the world. I think what's even more exciting and more profound is to think that we're probably never really in our bodies in the first place. I think that our consciousness is extended out. I don't think that I don't think it's just my little skull here, your brain, and that's it. I think that if these non-local consciousness aspects and all of this. That's why we can do psychic stuff when we're just sitting here. We can do remote viewing, or we can do an experiment with clairvoyance. We're not going out of body. I'm just closing my eyes, or maybe not even, with remote viewing, I might just be like, with remote viewing, for example, you often use an ideogram, which is a little squiggle, basically. And then you touch that squiggle with your pencil. And as you touch it, you try to tune in, you try to literally feel what is at that location. So you're not using visuals in that moment. You're using more kinetic or textural, or you're trying to sort of feel what is at that location. So I think that that's because we are interconnected at all times. I think that the evidence is leaning more and more that our brains, our minds are interconnected, and we're able to tune into different things at any given moment. The reason we don't is because our awareness is dominated by, we're doing other things. Like right now, I'm looking at the microphone, looking at you on the screen, and I'm kind of aware of the room I'm in, and there's all that sensory information, which is overriding all of that psychic signal. But if I close my eyes and I start to sort of tune inwardly, and I try to sort of cut off all of the sensory information around me, this gets back to the sensory deprivation we were talking about earlier with the Gansfeld, or different kinds of methods like that. You're removing the dominant sensory information and allowing the subtle, more unconscious aspects to come to the fore. And I think when we do that, it's not that we're disconnecting and reconnecting to something else. I think that it's just that we're putting our awareness onto something that we're already connected to. So I think with an out of body experience, probably all of this information is already there. We're already interconnected. We're not separate from the outside. We're not, we're not divided in this way. It's just that we have to get ourselves to a point where we can experience that. So in a way, the key to having an out of body experience is not going out of body. The key is shutting off all of this sensory information so we can realize that we're already out of body.
So do you think there's ever going to be a way, like the out of body consciousness that supposedly downloads into our brain, do you think we're ever going to be able to measure what it's made of? Like the way we have the Large Hadron Collider keeps discovering smaller and smaller, newer particles. Do you think we're going to have a machine like that that's going to be able to discover the form that consciousness takes that is downloaded?
I really hope so, because that would be a real game changer. If we could find the mechanism, if we could find the medium by which psi functions, because I think we do have good evidence now. We've got 140 years or so of data now, and especially the research that's been done since, say, the late 90s, or even earlier, probably, maybe some of the stuff from the 80s as well. But we've got that real body of information now. So I think we can safely say that there is something going on. I think most of the scientists who have really looked at the data can see that there is a consistent effect that's seen over and over and over again. In ordinary people, in ordinary people, we know the effect size is going to be about 7-8%. Not huge, but not nothing either. It's a significant effect, and that's seen in ordinary people. Obviously, it's more in people who are gifted or kind of trained or whatever. But I think that if we could find some kind of mechanism, then I think things are really gonna change. I think we might already have some of the mechanisms, but we've got to find the connection points in the brain of how those function. There's different theories like Orkor, for example. Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff put forward this idea that the microtubules, or very, very low level structures of cells, could in some way be entangled, and that could be the solution to what consciousness is, or could in some way be an explanation for near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, that kind of thing. So that's possible too. But yeah, there's even some theories like hidden sector matter, for example, from string theory. This idea that, I mean, again, it's just a theory, but if it did turn out to be true, hidden sector matter could be a way that we could have a sort of energy form of ourselves, or say an energetic, or a different kind of matter, let's say, a different kind of matter replica of our physical brain. So if you can have a hidden sector brain, for example, maybe the hidden sector brain can function separately to the physical brain, or if any kind of energetic brain could function in that way. So you could basically have a replica of yourself. So maybe an out-of-body experience is a replica. Maybe it's literally like a replica brain is what's interacting with the world. I don't know. I mean, there's so many possibilities. It's all just conjecture, but at the same time, I think it's crazy to say that these experiences couldn't happen, because there are so many possibilities of how it could potentially work, even within very conventional science. So
I personally, for what it's worth, I'm not a scientist, but from the beginning of researching this, I always thought somehow string theory would tie in with this. Was it 9 or 12 dimensions? Some say 9, some say 12. I mean, there could be a non-local form of all of our consciousness in all those dimensions that download in all different ways. And I know, like, regarding shadow people, Dr. Stephen Hawking did a YouTube talk speaking about how, like, shadow people reflections from one dimension can reflect in another, which, you're not going to get smarter than Dr. Stephen Hawking. So when you hear that, it's pretty encouraging.
So Roger Penrose worked with him. So, it's and he's one of the main people.
And so did Dr. Stuart Hameroff, right? Both of them worked with him. Am I wrong?
I'm not sure. I couldn't say, but I know that Roger Penrose did. So, but there's many. Brian Josephson, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics, he also puts forward a theory of how quantum effects could allow for psychic abilities. So there's lots of scientists who feel that this could be the answer to what's going on with psychic abilities. It's not woo-woo stuff. It's really solid scientists who are saying this. So people like me, who are not scientists, we're just repeating what the actual scientists are saying. So it's very frustrating when people kind of dismiss it as woo-woo. Oh, people just start talking about quantum and all of this. Well, the reason I talk about quantum theory is because literally Nobel laureates have told me that this is one way that psychic abilities could work.
That's what has given me all the encouragement. And there's so many people like you, people like everyone at the Rhine, that are taking, might not all be official scientists, but are taking such a scientific non-woo approach. And then often the woo is what gets the most media attention, and that makes so many people who haven't looked into the data dismiss it, because they'll hear the most absurd definition that somehow got the most likes on social. And then a lot of the research that's being done, hopefully more and more, is going to start coming to the forefront, because I think this is the most profound game changer we could ever imagine.
I really love the science. I really love getting.
So thank you so much. So just let all our guests know, I know we mentioned at the beginning, where can everyone find you?
Well, the best place is grahamnichols.com. I've actually sort of been leaving social media a bit, so definitely my website is the best place. I am going to be putting a lot more information videos and stuff on YouTube now. I'm kind of been thinking I want to cover a lot of these topics in a bit more depth via my channel on there. So, and I'll also be putting up an alternative channel, because I think Google is a very toxic organization, and a lot of these social media platforms are. So I'm going to be looking into alternative options, like maybe PeerTube or something like that, where people can get the videos without any advertising and all of that as well. Yeah, so my YouTube or grahamnichols.com. got my full course on there, information about my books, and also my infraliminal sound technology that I mentioned during the talk. So all of that's on.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, What the Fuck Just Happened? A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. And you can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife. You can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can also read about how much I harassed them trying to get evidence, see if they were cheating, and see if they were sane. There, you can subscribe to our newsletter. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hi, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_ or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder what the fuck just happened.